Good afternoon and welcome to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host, Vincent Hill, and to our listeners on Sirius XM Radio, Channel 109. We've been covering the Yesenia Sesmas case in Kansas City. This is the young lady who was charged with murder for murdering Laura Abraca, shooting her in the head, and she says it all started because they had this agreement to actually give her baby. Laura had a baby that was 6 days old. They had some kind of agreement to give this baby up. And she says she didn't mean to shoot her, but the gun accidentally went off. Again, she was shot in the head. She's on trial right now for murder and kidnapping. She actually fled to Dallas with baby Sophia. Now, just yesterday, her mother of the victim was in the courtroom, and she actually testified that she knew the suspect in this case. She had been to the house that she shared with the victim and her fiance, and she had never heard of this conversation regarding giving up this baby. There was a bombshell in the courtroom today. Court has actually been placed on hold because the suspect in this case, Yesenia Sesmas, complained of chest pains and said she felt faint. So the judge ordered her to go to the hospital to get treatment. So we're still waiting to come back from that to find out what's going on in the courtroom in that case. And once we have a live feed from the courtroom, of course, we will take you right back to the courtroom. Another bombshell today in Ohio. Shawn Grate, his death penalty sentencing hearing was today. So we're going to talk about that. And I want to bring on my guest, Nicole DeBorde, criminal defense attorney out of Houston, Texas. Nicole, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Quite welcome. So before we get into Shawn Grate, let's go a little bit over the case that we're working on, Yesenia Sesmas out of Kansas. What's your take on this case? Now, I got to tell you, as a former police officer, and I've worked a lot of crime scenes, a lot of shootings, when I looked at the crime scene photo of Laura seated on that couch, to me, there was nothing that said it was an accident. I looked at the shot. I looked at the position of her body. So to me, as an investigator, that was intentional. So do you think the jury will actually buy this whole, oh, I was going to trade my baby, she was going to give me the baby, and that was the deal we had?
Not if there are any parents on the jury. I think that this is just sort of an absurd effort at making some kind of a defense. I think that this is going to be a very difficult sell.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But I think, you know, as jurors, it's always just that one juror that could come back and say, yeah, I could see that happening, because one of the things I experienced in Nashville, there were women that were selling their babies off for, you know, upwards of $40,000, and that's how they made a living. You know, they would have these babies, they would sell them off for whatever reason. So it only takes that one juror, that one story, you know, from the defense to say, oh, well, it happened here, it happened there. Do you think that could be a chance?
You know, I think it's going to be hard for the defense to get in evidence of things happening in other jurisdictions to other people. I mean, really, this boils down to her conduct and whatever their agreement may or may not have been. And under either circumstance, whether she did or whether she didn't, and I suspect she didn't agree to sell her baby, she's going to have a lot of explaining to do, the defendant is, concerning having fired a shot in the direction of this person. It certainly doesn't line up with some sort of an agreeable arrangement. It sounds like an attack.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the thing that sticks out the most, if this was this agreement between the two of them, why show up with this gun? And more importantly, you know, once you've killed her, why flee from Kansas to Dallas, Texas, and go on the run, you know, as criminals do? So it'll be very interesting. Again, we're waiting for court to resume in that case in Kansas. The suspect in this case, Yesenia Sesmas, was transported to a hospital complaining of chest pains and feeling faint. But while we wait on that, we want to talk about Shawn Grate. Again, today was his death sentence hearing. So Shawn himself actually spoke at his sentencing. So we want to go to that, and then we'll come back and discuss it. Take a listen. Welcome back to Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio, channel 109. What you just heard was Shawn Grate. Just to recap, Shawn Grate from Ohio, convicted of 2 counts of murder, and it all started from a 911 call back in September of 2016 from a person we came to know as Jane Doe. She was actually kidnapped by Shawn Grate. She was able to get his cell phone, call 911. Police showed up to the house. They discovered 2 deceased bodies in that case. Nicole, I want to, the first thing he started out with saying was, today is a good day. I guess my question is, who's it a good day for? Because there's no winners here. Okay, yes, he got convicted, right? We know the outcome of that, but who is it a good day for?
It's such a strange and rambling statement. It certainly doesn't seem to achieve any goal. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It honestly almost makes me question his competency. It's kind of a going nowhere. I don't know who the good day is supposed to be for. You know, I don't know why he's talking directly to these victims. None of what he's saying would be anything any defense attorney would recommend. And I don't think it's going to help him get anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think there was a lot of rambling on, and it just plays to his psyche. Like, what type of individual was this? But again, he lured Jane Doe into the house with the pretense of they were going to read the Bible, and then he told her, she was not going anywhere. And again, luckily, she was able to get that cell phone, call 911, and alert police to what was going on. So I want to take us back to that hearing from earlier today. We want to hear from Curtis Stanley. He's the son of one of Shawn Grate's victims. Take a listen. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio, channel 109. What you just heard was a victim impact statement from Curtis Stanley. He's the son of Stacy Stanley, one of Shawn Grate's victims. Still with me is Nicole DeBorde. Nicole, that was a pretty powerful statement that he gave, and there was a lot of things that he touched on that I thought were key. One of them being, of course, his daughters being the son. His daughters will not get a chance to know their grandmother. And what I found interesting as well was the fact that the sons and a few people in the neighborhood kind of knew Shawn Grate was responsible. They just couldn't catch him for whatever reason. What are your thoughts on that statement?
I do think it was very moving, and it contrasted with the things that Grate said himself. It makes his statement seem even more absurd. I mean, this is a real person with real destruction to his family, getting up and explaining the day-to-day reality of what's happened. And I think it was powerful. It gives you an idea of the grief and the fear and the not knowing, but guessing that was going on prior to discovering exactly what happened. It was a pretty powerful presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that Shawn Grate said from jail was, that these women were already dead because they were part of the system. But you heard the son say it best. She cooked for everyone. She would have helped anyone. So that tells me she was very much alive, especially in her family's eyes, contrary to what Shawn Grate and how he described her. We're going to cut to a break, but we will be right back here on the Law and Crime Network to get more from Shawn Grate's sentencing from earlier today. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. You just heard from another brother of Stacy Stanley, Nick Adams. And Nicole, what I found interesting here, we heard from the son earlier, and he said, I hope you get life in prison. But this brother is very adamant. He says, I hope you get death. I hope you feel what my sister felt. And again, we hear from a family member that tells us the type of person that Stacy was. What do you think about his statement? These
family members are doing a beautiful job of humanizing the victims in this case. And that is definitely an important part of a trial of this nature. It's something to keep in mind on the flip side for the defense is the defense needs to be doing that for the defendant as much as what we're seeing about the victims in this case is heartbreaking and true, what the jurors and the court is going to have to do in this case is decide what punishment is appropriate. And defense counsel's job is to humanize their client as well. So it will be interesting to see what, if any, headway has been made in that regard.
Right.
His statement certainly didn't help.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a defense attorney yourself, how do you humanize a guy like Shawn Grate? I mean, look what he did, kidnapping. He used religion to lure his victim. He had 2 dead bodies in that home. So how do you humanize this guy?
It's horrific. I mean, there's no question about the things that he did were absolutely vile and terrible. And the sadness and grief that he's created by his conduct is really without, there's nothing that can be said about it to explain it or to make it less. And they shouldn't try to do that. The defense attorneys in this case need to focus on his mental health, focus on any good qualities that he had, any of the things that he did in his life that were right. I mean, there's no minimizing any of these wrongs, but they need to at least talk about the rest of his qualities, if he has any positive qualities, and they need to talk about his mental health and the mental state that he was in at the time. Those are the kinds of things that could potentially mitigate his ability to think through what he was doing and whether or not he was causing this kind of grief and harm.
Got it. Nicole, we need to get back in the courtroom. We're actually going to hear from Stacey Stanley's sister, Gina Stanley. Take a listen. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. You just heard from Gina Stanley, Stacey Stanley's sister. And I noticed, I know our listeners on Sirius XM cannot see this, but for our viewers, if you noticed, the family members are all wearing purple shirts in solidarity for Stacey Stanley. And you just heard from her sister. It looks like it's, Nicole, 2-1 for the death penalty for these family members. That's what they're asking the court to give here. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, it's great that they're being able to get up in front of the court and say their piece. That's exactly what the victim impact statement is for. The court, however, has other things that it must consider in determining whether or not the death penalty is appropriate, as does the jury. It's really important that victims of crime have the opportunity via victim impact statement to be able to say their piece. It isn't, however, evidence, and it is not what the judge will consider in making that ultimate decision.
So what are some of those things that they must consider when determining to put someone to death for our listeners and for our viewers?
So one thing that the judge and the jury has to consider is whether or not the individual constitutes, or his behavior constitutes, a continuing danger. And it seems like a pretty simple question, especially when the crime is as bad as this one. But the reality is that it is in the context of someone who is in a very high security prison situation. So in that situation, is this person likely to continue to pose a danger to those around him? And the answer, obviously, very well could be yes.
Right.
That's what the testimony and the facts will have to bear out for that decision to be final.
Right. All right. Thanks, Nicole. We're going to take a quick break, and I understand there is movement in the Kansas courtroom, so we're going to see if we can get you back in that courtroom right after this break. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Still with me, Nicole DeBorde, criminal defense attorney in Houston, Texas. Nicole, we're listening to testimony from a Joseph Daniff. He's with the Kansas City Police Department, but he's actually tasked out with the FBI. And his specialty, I believe he called it Cellular Assessment Services Team. And, of course, they go over cell phone records. It talks about who you've called, who you text, the geolocation of that phone, past and present. So I think that's how they actually tracked this baby down to Dallas, Texas. But I have a question for you as a defense attorney. We've heard from Detective Michael McMurray, Dallas PD. We've heard from the SWAT officer that made entry into that home. We're hearing from this officer. But I have not seen the defense do any cross-examination. You are a defense attorney. Is this a move you would make?
Probably not on all of these witnesses. I mean, I suppose it's entirely possible that what's going to happen is that the defense would call these witnesses and then question them in their own case in chief. But that seems highly unlikely, and it is definitely unusual that not a single one of these witnesses have been cross-examined. Certainly there are details that could have given the jury pause or hesitation that should have been pointed out hate to armchair quarterback. Maybe there's a plan here that I'm not seeing, but it is definitely unusual.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a defendant in this case, if I was seated there as a defendant, I would be looking at my attorney like, hey, what's going on? You have all of these experts testifying against me, but you're not cross-examining them. I would really question that. Let's get back into the courtroom and hear more testimony from Officer Joseph Daniff. Welcome to the Law and Crime Network. Looks like they're taking a sidebar in the courtroom. Still on the stand is Joseph Daniff. He's a Kansas City police officer assigned to the FBI task force. I guess his specialty is cell phone data, which is how they tracked Yesenia Sesmas to Dallas, Texas by her cell phone geolocation. Still with me is Nicole DeBorde. Nicole, we touched on this just a few minutes ago. And, I've been watching this trial pretty closely, and it looks like the only person that has spoke on the defense side has been her translator. Again, I still haven't seen any objections, really. I really definitely haven't seen any cross-examination by the defense. And, again, you have a very strong witness. It's Friday. Earlier, the defendant allegedly had chest pain. She had to be rushed to the hospital, but she's back in court. So don't you think that's playing into the minds of the juror, like, oh, well, you were complaining of chest pains. You thought you were going to faint, but yet you're sitting in court and your defense is not doing anything for you.
It's definitely not a good look all around, and the evidence that's coming in is definitely devastating. Normally what would happen in these cases, and perhaps it's taken place either in written motions or outside the presence of this jury, but the defense would at least be asking some questions about the validity of the procedures used to say that the cell phone was where these police officers say that it was, and these experts. We know nothing about this individual's training and background and use of the equipment, and whether or not the equipment was working properly and any rate of error in detecting these types of things. They obviously had a cell phone number. They knew who they were looking at. And there can really be some confirmation bias in this kind of evidence. And what I mean by that is that they already know who they're looking for and probably likely where she is. So, they're likely to find what they think they already know. And questions ought to be asked to make sure that that's not what has happened here. And in fact, they've traced actual locations using real science. And I just don't know that based on what the defense has not done so far.
Yeah. And, it's crucial because, of course, all of this stuff, when things like this go to trial, your cell phone records, all of that is crucial into, proving your case as a prosecution. But on the flip side of that, we've seen where cell phone data hasn't been that accurate. And, this would be the time, in my opinion, for the defense to come back and really hammer this so-called expert, if you will, on this cellular data. And again, I haven't seen it. So, to me, this was not, so far has not been a good day for the defense in this case.
I would have to agree. And the reality is that the rules of evidence permit a defense attorney to ask questions even before cross-examination from a proposed expert to determine whether or not that person is even in fact an expert and has data and facts that support the opinion he's about to give in front of the jury. Once that genie's out of the bottle, there's no taking it back. This lawyer didn't ask any questions. Maybe these issues were vetted before we saw this witness take the stand, but there's certainly no indication of that having happened.
Right. While they're actually still on this break here in the courtroom, we're going to hear from Laura's mother in this case. Again, Laura is the victim in this case. She was shot in the head. Her baby Sophia, was kidnapped and taken to Dallas, Texas. But yesterday she gave testimony in this trial. Take a listen. Laura. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. You were listening to testimony of Laura's mother in this case. She is the victim in this case. Again, you have Yesenia Sesmas on trial for murder and kidnapping of baby Sophia, and then transporting her to Dallas, Texas after that kidnapping, and she was apprehended there in Dallas, Texas, by investigators. Her mother was actually there just the day before her daughter was killed. So there's some interesting things that she has to say about the whole conversation regarding whether there was this discussion of Laura giving her baby to the defendant in this case. Still with me, of course, criminal defense attorney Nicole DeBorde. Nicole, what do you think the mother's testimony so far? I think it's very crucial to kind of set the tone of what happened at least 24 hours before Laura was killed.
Exactly, and the prosecutor needs to establish that somebody saw her, that she was fine, that everything appeared to be normal,
right.
that there had been contact with the defendant. All of these things kind of set the scene. Let the jurors know what was happening before everything went wrong. So she is critical.
Right, absolutely, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, it does set the stage to say, nope, she was fine. You know, there was no signs of distress or anything like that that was going on in the courtroom. We want to listen to more of the mother's testimony from yesterday in the courtroom. Take a listen. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. You've still been hearing testimony from the victim's mother. Laura was the victim in this case. And Nicole, she touched on a few interesting points, a very crucial point, actually. She said that when she left that morning, baby Sophia was home. And then when she returned, baby Sophia was not there. And she didn't see her again until she was returned by the FBI. So that gives us a little bit of a timeline of when everything happened. Now, how crucial is her testimony to establish this timeline to say that, yes, she did kidnap and kill Laura?
I think it's critical, and it's critical for an additional reason, and that is that they made plans for this baby's arrival. They bought things like a crib and clothing. They were not planning to sell this child or have her live somewhere else. She's given the jury some really important data. You know, it's heartbreaking. And if you're not going to cross-examine a witness, this may be the one that you choose not to cross-examine. But experts don't fall into that category. Yeah,
I don't know if I would, even take the chance of cross-examining the mother, especially the mother that was in the home just the day before. And to your point, they had plans for baby Sophia. I mean, I've seen pictures of Laura and her fiance, of course, baby Sophia's father. They look like a very happy couple and a very happy family. So I think that weighs heavily on the minds of the jury to say, yeah, I don't know if we're buying this whole, oh, she was going to give the baby to me, but she reneged and I accidentally shot her, because there's nothing to suggest that Laura didn't want Sophia.
Absolutely. And, nothing about that claim, quite frankly, makes any sense. If you have an agreement to take a child, to adopt a child, to exchange a child, I mean, there's just no reason in the world to bring a handgun to pick up a baby.
Right. Yeah, I think that speaks volumes. I mean, I don't even know what the defense to that would be, that, oh, she just had it for protection just in case. If the intent on that day was to make this exchange of baby Sophia, the handgun would be out of the question. But more importantly, the fleeing the state would definitely be out of the question. And I think that was her plan the entire time. What are your thoughts?
I have to agree. This is going to be an incredibly difficult sell for the defense. And, that's why, as you pointed out earlier, cross-examining these witnesses about the details is really critical. If you're going to at least get them to thinking about doubt and things that don't make sense, you've got to cross-examine the witnesses. Maybe not the mother, but the other witnesses in this trial.
Yeah, especially the experts. I mean, you had 3 experts. They're all law enforcement. And, I've been on the receiving end of defense cross-examination as a former police officer, and usually they're questioning everything I did. Did you dot your I's? Did you cross your T's? They're questioning everything, and, we just don't see it in this case. It looks like there's movement in the courtroom. We're going to take a quick look in the courtroom to see if we can figure out what's going on. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Nicole, wow. So for the second time today, Yesenia Sesmas has said that she feels sick, she has chest pains, and she needs medical attention. And again, we said it earlier, it's Friday. She did this earlier. Her defense hasn't really done anything today. Just to recap, she's currently on trial for murder and kidnapping. She killed Laura Abraca, allegedly shooting her in the head. She says it was an accident simply because Laura reneged on giving up baby Sophia. Then she fled to Dallas, Texas, where she was captured. Nicole, what are your final thoughts for today on this case and how it went today in court for the defense?
Well, I have no doubt that the defendant is feeling sick. It's kind of hard not to feel sick watching that, and I would imagine sitting in her chair, she feels especially so. I think this has been a tough day for the defense, and what seems to be their defense isn't selling. And at least it doesn't look like it from where I sit. And next week is going to have to be something very different for them to get any traction with this jury.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Nicole DeBorde, I thank you so much for joining us. I thank our listeners and our viewers on Law and Crime Network. And we will be right back in the courtroom on Monday covering this trial in Kansas. Thank you for watching. Good night.